Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, whichever coast you're on. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm really excited about this one. We've got a lot in store for you today. My name is Valentina Ziaeva. I'm a product marketing manager here at LimeLight. And today I'm joined by Darryl Hicks, the founder and CEO of FlexPay, and Nicholas DeGuise, who is the director of operations at FlexPay. So before I kind of hand it over to Darryl, who's going to talk a little bit more about what FlexPay, what they do, and how they can help maximize profits for your business, I want to just give a high-level overview of FlexPay and the background for the origin of how FlexPay got started. So for those of you that don't know, Darryl was actually an advertiser for 15 years. He was selling on 4 different continents, processing tens of millions of customers and transactions throughout that time. And actually, one of the biggest pain points that they found was credit card declines, which is how FlexPay was born. And Darryl saw the opportunity to help others with facing the same challenges, so he actually stopped selling products and founded FlexPay. So FlexPay is an AI-driven decline salvage service, and they can help recover up to 30 to 50% of your decline transactions within the very first month. So Darryl's gonna talk a little bit more about that. Then before I hand it over to Darryl, I just wanna cover some logistics with you guys. So a Q&A icon at the bottom of their screen. So anytime throughout this webinar, please feel free to ask as many questions as you like. We're going to keep it open for the entire webinar. And I will personally be fielding and monitoring all those questions to make sure that we answer each and every single one of your questions. So keep the questions coming. And yeah, finally, before I hand it to Darryl, I wanted to know, we kind of just wanted to know, since we're talking about credit card declines and how FlexPay can help your recovery rate, what is the current recovery rate? We launched a poll for everyone, and we're going to keep the poll open throughout the entire webinar and share the results again. So the poll is now open, so feel free to cast your votes throughout the entire webinar. And yeah, without further ado, then I'll hand it over to Darryl.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Valentina. Thanks for the opportunity to be here and talk about this. Like you said, as with all of our experience as an advertiser, this was a real problem for us, dealing with credit card declines. I mean, when you look at Visa and MasterCard, especially Visa as a publicly traded company, if you look at their prospectus, they'll say right there that credit card declines across the entire Visa network are 2% on the card present side. But I don't know a single marketer or advertiser that has credit card decline ratios that look anywhere near like 2%. And that's because when you talk to the merchant banks and acquirers for card not present, they'll tell you right away it's actually much closer to an average of 15–16% in card not present. And what we see for a lot of advertisers in the Nutra space and in other monthly recurring programs, it's usually north of 20%. So why? Why this big discrepancy? Why is it only 2% for card present and so much higher for card not present when it's the exact same cards? A lot of people think it's because maybe they're tapped into a subprime demographic. But I mean, even Walmart, which is pretty subprime, has credit card declines under 4% at the point of sale when the card is physically present. So it's not just about the demographic, because those exact same people with those exact same cards, if they go buy something from some of the customers who are on LimeLight, we're going to see dramatically higher declines. So we spend a lot of time digging into this, and I thought it might be nice just to spend 5 to 10 minutes to kind of go at a high level and talk about what's actually going on here, why we're seeing this problem. Because once we understand the why, then we can talk a little bit more about what we can do about it. But before we do that, I just thought I'd set the stage and say, we assume that this product is going to be a good fit for the majority of people that are listening into this call. It's not going to be right for everybody. And we're going to talk about who it's a good fit for and why. But for those that it is a good fit for, we do have something really compelling that we can make as an offer for the first 20 people that decide that they jump in and they want to give FlexPay a try. I wish I could offer it to more than that, but we were a little bit constrained on how much we can open up. But we're going to talk about that at the end of the webinar, but it is pretty awesome. give that we have through a partner of ours outside of FlexPay who's willing to bring something in. So you can stick around and wait for that at the end. Maybe we can jump right in here and just go through and talk a little bit more about the problem of credit card declines and where it's coming from. So screen share is working? Yes? All right, good stuff. So figured it might be good to work through a case study. So one of the first customers that we had that came onto FlexPay was a customer that had a nutraceutical product that they were shipping out, a $70 product that they were shipping. They have 350,000 customers on auto ship every month, shipping the product out, doing about $19 million a month in credit card processing. Now, for those of you who are quick at math, you might say those numbers don't add up. 70 times 350,000 is more than 19. Well, they do have a certain amount of slippage every month due to customer service cancellations, but the bigger problem is that $3 million a month of their transactions were declined. So the co-founder of this business was a personal friend of mine, and I asked him, well, what are you guys doing with your declines? Well, he said, we retried them, the soft declines, a few times. We also shipped them all to customer service so we can get a hold of them on the phone. And I said, great, how much are you recovering as a result of that? He said, about $500,000 a month on that $3 million we're getting back on the books. Now, that might look like a pretty good number, but actually it was costing him a lot of money in his customer service to actually get these people on the phone, resell them, and all that kind of stuff. So by sitting down and just giving him a few of the ideas of what we do in FlexPay, which they were able to do in their system, and then also eventually using our software, by leveraging the secret sauce of what we have with all the banking relationships and information, which I'm going to share with you guys today, we were able to get that up to $1.2 million a month recovered. So that's an extra $700,000 a month that they got off of their credit card declines. But what was interesting is that 50% of those customers that we salvaged on the transactions actually successfully rebilled 30 days later. We're not just salvaging transactions if someone is doing auto ship, we're salvaging customers. So actually the 700,000 that we did extra plus the 600, that's $1.3 million a month of found money that came out of this for this merchant. They run at about a 70% gross margin. So just so everyone understands what gross margin is, that's, every time you salvage $100, well, it's not pure profit, right? Because you have credit card processing fees, product fulfillment fees, incremental customer service fees and stuff. It's about 30% of the top line revenue that goes out the door in cost of goods sold, but still 70% gross margin because all the CPAs and other advertising fees are already paid for out of the transactions that approved up front. This really is 70% found money. That means for this client, it generated $910,000 a month in EBITDA, profit to the bottom line. And because of the way their business is valued, it increased the business valuation by $43 million. So a pretty solid win just off of going through and taking a look at their credit card declines. So I'd just like to stop here for a second and say, does anyone have any questions? I'm going to get into some of the nuances of what we did and how this works and what you can do in your business, regardless of whether you use FlexPay or not, but then also how FlexPay works. But any questions on this so far, as far as how we got some of these results?
I'm glad you stopped the question. So the first is, how many times for this specific client did you actually retry the transactions to recover them?
Yes. Okay. So this customer was retrying their declines 3 times before FlexPay. After FlexPay came in, we were retrying transactions 2.8 times. We actually lowered the number of retries, but we got a lot more money out of the retrying. The reason why it works that way is because we're using a machine learning system, which is looking at all the data of the customers, and we are not just blindly going and throwing mud against the wall and saying, well, we're going to try here, or just trying more frequently, which is really important for a lot of different reasons, which I'll get into later in the presentation as to why we have to be really careful about how many times we retry transactions. So we were retrying for this particular customer, and that seems to be the average across most customers as well, about 2.8 times. Now we can try less. We lose a little bit of performance if we do that. We have some customers that because they have restrictions on their mids, we're only retrying about 1.8 or 1.9 times average across all transactions. But the average, it seems to be that we can get pretty much peak performance if we try just under 3 times for these customers to get it back, which is about what they were doing before FlexPay. So that was a great question. Thanks.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That's an awesome result. And one more question we have from the audience is, do you, let's say, do you use step down pricing to recover transactions? And if so, what have the results been?
Right. So for most merchants, we do not use step down pricing. It is a good strategy at the very end of the salvage funnel. What we discovered was that at the end of the day, we're not just trying to salvage transactions, right? We are trying to salvage customers and we're trying to salvage revenue. So you can bump up your performance numbers by using step downs. But we found that you give up more money than what you gain by doing that. Because again, you have the same fixed cost on the product. Your credit card costs are variable. Customer service costs are usually about the same. So we were always looking at, how many dollars are we salvaging out of this process, right? So we can use step downs at the very end. After we've recovered as much as we possibly can, we can go one last attempt if the merchant accounts have the cap space for it and the wiggle room for it with some aggressive step downs just to salvage a customer and keep them around for 30 days later. But generally speaking, we are not using step downs to get over 90% of the performance that we have right now. We're really going at the full ticket.
Yeah, that's all the questions we have for now. Thanks, Darryl.
Okay, great. So we'll keep on going. So in the case of this particular customer, we really walked away with two big lessons. One, advertisers are losing more money than they realize. And two, you can recover more money than you realize. So I like as much as possible to give people quick wins. If you take a look at everything that we've done for clients using FlexPay and optimizations, one of the biggest things that we can see as an easy to implement, powerful impact, retry declines during business hours. Now, the reason why this is important is that we have over 1 billion transactions in our database right now. We have data that comes not just from merchants and not just from acquirers, merchant banks, but we also have data that comes directly from issuers, which is really important because we get to see the credit rating that they're putting on each transaction, and we get to see the reasons why they're approving and declining transactions. And for example, like you can see on this slide, in the case of JP Morgan Chase, we saw that all things being equal, credit card declines were double at 2 a.m. what they were at 2 p.m. Now, I don't know why that's the case. I don't really care either. I just care about what. But you can see it probably makes sense because somebody at the bank probably decided that if a transaction's coming through in the middle of the night, it's more likely that it's fraud than if it comes through in the middle of the day. So just this one little optimization on retrying soft declines during business hours, especially if you're processing in the wee hours of the morning, can be a pretty huge win. Again, every bank has their own standards that they apply as far as time of day and different strategies. But if you just went with a blunt instrument and said, okay, I want to do one thing that's going to optimize my business, this would be a really good one. But if you look at the data on that and say credit card declines are higher at 2 a.m. than they are at 2 p.m., that should start to have you ask questions, well, what's really going on here? Why is this happening? And this ties back to the problem that the bank is having, the difference between card present versus card not present. The problem with the banks is that still to this day, even in 2018, with people buying more stuff online and by phone than ever before, the vast majority of transactions are still card present. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty tech savvy guy, but when I think about it, the amount of times that I'm at a coffee shop or at a restaurant, the amount of transactions that show up on my statement where I'm actually tapping, swiping, using the chip or whatever, it still is, even for me, the majority of my transactions that are card present. Card not present for the banks is actually a much smaller piece, but almost all of their fraud is coming from card not present. So if you had a business, imagine that you had an affiliate that was sending you traffic, and you realize that almost all of your chargebacks and almost all of your fraud was coming from that one affiliate that represented a tiny little piece of your business, what would you do? You'd probably scrub the heck out of that transaction, right? So this is exactly what the banks are doing. This is why credit card declines are so high on card not present transactions. Their big solution is to put a couple of bouncers at the door and start restricting transactions. They want to filter them to cut down on fraud.
Not to interrupt, we have a question from the audience. They wanted to know if, kind of, what do you know about the upcoming changes at the banks with information requirements and restrictions on client salvage, and how would FlexPay fit into that?
Sure. You were breaking up a little bit there. I can't hear you super well, but I think you were asking about upcoming changes at the
Yeah,
bank.
yeah, upcoming changes at the bank on specifically on approval ratio requirements and restrictions on decline salvage, and how would
Right.
we fit in?
Yeah. So that's a really good question because since Vantiv was just acquired by WorldPay a little while back, they've actually changed their policies at the bank, and several other banks are following suit, where they're now imposing um, minimum approval ratios on merchant accounts per month. In the case of Vantiv, it's pretty aggressive. You must keep a 50% approval ratio as a minimum on your merchant accounts. So that's a bit problematic, because if you've got an overall upfront decline ratio of say 25%, and you retry all your declines once and they all fail again, now you've just doubled your number of declines. It doesn't take long before your mid is completely out of whack. Now, the reason why the banks are doing this is because they are actually required by Visa to maintain a certain approval and decline ratio across their entire book, across their entire portfolio. They make a lot of money with the fees that they charge off of people in higher risk spaces. They still can't just let you run wild with retrying transactions. So we are seeing this more and more, that recovery, the amount of times that you can retry a decline transaction, is under pressure by the banks. The good news is that in FlexPay, we have the ability to predict with a high degree of accuracy before we process a transaction what the likelihood of it approving is, but also the likelihood of chargeback and the likelihood of refund, and the transaction fees that are going to be incurred as we process it. We take all of that into consideration before we decide to process a transaction. So, that's why, like I said before, the average amount of retries is, let's just say it's 2.8 across all customers, retrying 2.8 times on declined transactions. If we are processing Advantive and we had that limit, we might say, okay, right now by default, FlexPay says if we are 88% or we are 78% confident that this is the perfect time and strategy to go with processing a transaction, go ahead. If it was in a case with like Vantiv, where we're limited in how many retries we can do, we might bump that up to 88% or 90%, meaning do not process a transaction unless you are 90% sure that this is the perfect time to go for it. Now, of course, we lose a little bit of performance. We lose a little bit of recovery by doing that. But what we gain is that we have way more approvals to retry attempts, which then keeps the mid a lot healthier. And each time we successfully salvage a transaction, that's one more approved transaction, which buys us more wiggle room for more retries in the future. So we give up a little bit performance, but not that much, and we can really limit the amount of retries. Again, that's the advantage of having an intelligent system rather than just trying all your declines and going. We're putting some intelligence into what we try and when we try it, so we can really manage that. Does that help?
Yeah, that was lots of great context. Thanks.
Okay, cool. So we'll keep going here. So these two bouncers that the banks put at the door, there's two software systems out there that the banks use for restricting card not present transactions. They are FICO Falcon and Actimize. And both of those softwares look at a whole bunch of data that comes in and decide whether or not they're going to approve transactions. But there's a problem. Right now, both of those systems, and they will, I'm not guessing at this, we've spoken directly to the banks that are using this software, because again, FlexPay is working in partnership with the issuers on this problem, right? We're not just guessing at a lot of this stuff. They know that they right now have a 13-to-1 false decline ratio, which is why we see the declines being so high on card not present. They're doing the best they can to protect themselves from fraud, and they are totally happy to throw a whole bunch of babies out with the bathwater. So the way this works is you get this one guy coming up, and he's pretty sketchy. There's no way that he deserves to be coming into the bank. But we got all these other people that might look a little bit sketchy, but they're actually pretty legit. The system messes up by saying, not only are we going to scrub this guy, we're going to scrub all these guys as well. They all get blocked. These guys are the problem, which means we're down to a 13-to-1 false decline ratio. A lot of perfectly good, legit transactions being blocked. So to understand how this is happening and why it's happening, I thought it might be good to kind of paint a little bit of a picture of what's happening behind the scenes. So we can think of Visa and MasterCard as the rails that run across the economy, right? This is how money is getting from one point to the other. The destination that we're going to is the card issuing bank. Now, in your transactions, you might think, I ask this question to people all the time, who's responsible for approving or declining transactions? A lot of people think it's your merchant bank. That's not true. Other people think it's Visa or MasterCard. That's not true either. Over 98% of all of your declines are decided by the card issuing bank. They are the one that decides whether a transaction is approved or declined. There's a little bit of other risk and fraud controls that can exist at the gateway level or at the merchant bank level, but almost all of the decisions on approval and declines are actually made at the other end of the rails at your destination, which is the card issuing bank. So how do we get transactions from you as a vendor or a merchant over to the card issuing bank? You use a merchant bank. They're like the passenger car that runs on those rails. And stamped on the side of every one of these passenger cars is a merchant category code. It's a 4-digit code, otherwise known as your MCC, that gets stamped on the outside of your passenger car. That's one of the things the banks look at when you show up, when they decide whether they're going to approve you. And the people that run in these passenger cars, those are our transactions that we're trying to get in. The transaction running in the passenger car on the rails. So now it arrives at the destination, you're bumping up against this guy. Guess what? He's got a checklist, and he's going to look at a whole bunch of things to decide whether he wants to approve your transaction or not. He's going to look at things like the credit limit on your card, your buying behavior as a consumer, or other internal bank policies. But then there's other things that he looks at, like the timing of the transaction, what merchant bank or acquirer you're using, and certain things about your data feed, whether you have characters in the names or your recurring flag or other CVV and other fields like that on the gateway. So we see here is there's a whole bunch of things we can't control. But there are some things that we can control. So let's look at what happens at just the things that we can control. Let's say that the transaction shows up at the other end and it's not really the best timing, not really using the best merchant bank and the right MCC, and your data feed is a little bit messed up. That's going to result in a credit score of 659. Now, by the way, we actually have, again, over 1 billion transactions in the record in our database from the issuers. We actually have most of the transactions from most of the merchants who are on LimeLight right now. And if anybody wants to know what their credit score is on their transactions and how the banks are actually scoring them, we can look up their transactions and tell them this is some of the data that we use in order to optimize the approval ratios and do a better job. Because then 659 means the transactions decline. But then what happens if we clean up the timing, use a better bank with a better MCC, clean up the data feed even just a little bit, that can be enough to get it down to 643. That means the transaction is now approved and you're in the money. So again, we got transactions flowing through. They get assigned a certain credit rating by our Mr. Bouncer at the end, and this one's going to get declined. But now, in this case, we adjust timing, we adjust the acquirer, we adjust the data feed, we get a better credit score, you're in the money, transactions approved. So the big takeaway from this is small adjustments make a huge difference. And this is how FlexPay is able to get the performance that it does. On average right now for people on LimeLight and other merchants that we have outside of LimeLight, whatever people were doing with their declines before we came along, we've essentially doubled it or better. So if someone had like, $1 million in declines and they were getting $200,000 out of that with their salvage efforts, we're going to come along and we're going to get them $400,000 on average, but with less grief and less risk along with it at the same time. So the 3 big strategies that we're using here, again, to kind of summarize, is time, transit, and test. If you leverage these 3 properly, you can end up with some pretty solid performance. And that is a wrap on my side at that point. Unless there's other questions before we jump in, I'm going to pass it over to Nick for a demo, I think.
Yeah, Darryl, one more question is a good question. I'm constantly bumping up against cap space on my mins. So what happens if I don't have enough room for transactions that FlexPay salvages?
Yeah, this is a problem that we've run into with a few merchants, especially as some merchants have been like losing a lot of merchant accounts lately. It's been a pretty rocky time. When it comes to cap space, the way that I used to look at it when I was an advertiser is, do I want revenue or do I want profit? I mean, at the end of the day, profit is the name of the game. We have some customers on FlexPay right now where using FlexPay and the salvage that it does is the only difference between them having a business that's break even or that's profitable. Because the margins for advertisers are just getting completely squeezed. I mean, it's brutal right now what's happening to a lot of the advertisers in this space. Margins are not getting any bigger. Merchant fees are going up. Fulfillment fees, they are what they are. Customer service costs, I mean, there's only so much optimization to be done, and margins are just really getting squeezed. So anytime we can come in and generate a little bit more profit, I really feel that that deserves to have the first spot in whatever cap space that we've got. Sometimes advertisers don't have a choice. They have commitments with affiliates to buy a certain amount of traffic, and they're worried that if they cut their traffic too much, they might lose those relationships. Generally speaking, we found that that's not the case. It's more important that they just really keep a laser beam focused on profit first, revenue second. My analogy for this is like, you wouldn't walk in, if you were bumping up against cap space, you wouldn't walk into your customer service call center and say, I need you to cancel and refund more customers so that I can free up cap space to process more transactions so I can pay more CPAs to the affiliate networks. You would never do that. It doesn't make any sense. But essentially that's what's happening with credit card declines. You're having customers that are incorrectly, improperly being canceled out of your programs by these risk systems at the banks. And if a system like FlexPay can do a better job of uncanceling them, well, then that's the profit that you really need in your business that you really should be putting in first. So whatever cap space you have, run as much revenue and profit as you can. And if that means buying a little bit less traffic so you can use up that cap space for your profit, then I think that probably makes sense. But either way, it's a tough scenario because nobody likes having to call up affiliates and say, hey, I have to buy less traffic from you right now. It's not an easy thing. That's the way that we typically talk to customers about cap space.
Gotcha. And before we hand it over to Nick to do a live demo of FlexPay and how to configure it in LimeLight, Steven Sanderson, it looks like you raised your hand. So I just chatted you. There's a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to chat us your question, please do so.
Yeah, so I got that question just popped up here. It's about international geos and markets. Does FlexPay work well internationally? Yes. So we absolutely can help internationally. For sure, it depends on who you're selling to, right? If you're selling to international customers and using international processing, FlexPay can really help a lot because they run into the same problems that we have here in the US. If you are using international processing to charge American customers, that's going to be a real problem. We can still help, but not as well. And one of the reasons why is that the number one single biggest thing that increases the risk score at the issuers, like we talked about that risk score in the presentation, is a mismatch of geography between the issuing bank and the acquiring bank. That means if you have a merchant account in Europe and you're using that to charge Americans, your risk rating is going to be through the roof and you're going to end up with a lot of extra credit card declines. We can still mitigate that to a certain extent by cleaning up the other things that we can control, but that transit factor, right? The passenger car that you're showing up in at the other side, because it's an international passenger car, automatically viewed as a lot more sketchy by the card issuing banks. Now, if you do have a geography match, right? Like you're using a Scandinavian bank to charge Scandinavian consumers, or a UK bank to charge UK consumers, or an Italian bank to charge Italian consumers, that's always going to get you the absolute best approval ratios. That's a critical thing to have a geography match between acquirer and issuer. If you have that match and you still have credit card declines, then we're going to be able to crush it for you and really help you out with getting those recovered. Hopefully that helps. Belgian bank charging Scandinavia clients have huge declines. Yeah, that's probably, even though they're both in the EU, that's good. It's better than if you were using a non-EU bank. We have some relationships with offshore banks. I don't want to speak too far out of turn, but maybe this is something where we can kind of do like a private session one-on-one and we can take a look at exactly which acquirer you're using, if you don't mind sharing, and also taking a look at what MCC it's in, and we can see if we can help you out there. But I would say it's going to be, your risk rating is going to be better because you're using an EU bank to charge an EU customer. But ideally, you need a merchant account, if at all possible, within the same country, really, as the customers that you're charging. Yeah, all right, we'll talk privately after.
Yes, Stephen, we have your email, so we'll definitely follow up with you privately about your specific situation. But thank you very much for your question. Good question. So, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, keep your questions coming. The Q&A is open for the entire webinar, whether the questions are for Darryl or Nick. But I think now that we have some background on what FlexPay does and Darryl's awesome presentation, now you guys probably want to see how the thing works. So then I'm thinking that we should hand it over to Nick, and Nick is going to do a live demo of FlexPay and how you can configure it within the LimeLight platform.
Sounds good. So let me share my screen here with you guys. So when you log in, so there's two things you're going to configure when you're working with FlexPay. We have the FlexPay portal and we have the LimeLight portal. The FlexPay portal is going to be where you're going to see this FlexPay performance, see what we're doing with your transactions. It's kind of like your gateway portal that you would log into normally. This screen here, Valentino, my screen is showing okay?
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. So this screen here is your login. So you would normally put your username and password that will provide you. And from there, you'll end up on your transaction summary. These transaction summary pages, let me move this camera off the screen here. These transaction summary pages here will show you one by one all your specific transactions. If you need to manually create payments, you can do so in here. You can see everything that's processing in real time throughout the day. This is actually a live account, so we're showing you these are transactions that are going through today, that have been running through the system today. You'll also have access to a suite of reports. So I'm going to show you the platform first, then I'll show you how to set it up. You'll have an access to a suite of reports. If you come over here in the little menu over here, you have a customer recovery report, which will walk you through various aspects of what we're doing. You have your performance report, which is this report I have open here. It will show you broken down by currency within specific billing weeks, how many declines are being received by the platform, how many of those are eligible, how many of those are fallen unrecoverable, how many of them are still in recovery as of the day you're looking at your report. So for example, this here, we still have a few transactions that are still in recovery from last month. Generally, we try to keep recoveries within the first 21 to 30 days. Certain clients and certain accounts, we can go a little bit over that. But as Darryl was saying, we always try to stick within the just under 3 from a retry count perspective. So we don't want to try more than 3 times on average across your entire book of business. So yes, you'll see this, and you can see here, you have your recovery rate broken down by week. Some weeks you have more, some weeks you have less. We have some specific cases in here where you have a number of customers that were a lot of older customers that came back in. So this is just one of the screens you'll be looking at. You also have a weekly recovery breakdown showing you similar data with fully downloadable files that give you a line-by-line breakdown of every transaction that's included in these files, showing you also what was recovered within that specific period, so in dollar values, not just in transaction values. And then you have what falls into the eligibility details. When I talk about eligibility details, one of the key factors that we look at is missing transactions. Because this is an integration between LimeLight's system and FlexPay system, we do occasionally have transactions that don't come back to FlexPay. It's important to note that your customer record will stay in LimeLight the entire time. We never take ownership of your customer record. So LimeLight remains the system of record, and if, for example, a customer comes through and calls you back between the attempts that FlexPay is making, LimeLight will never send that back to FlexPay, and that just goes in what FlexPay considers as a missing situation. And that's not an unusual situation. You'll normally expect somewhere in the 8 to 10% of your transactions to go missing, whether it be the customer refunds in the meantime and you don't want to charge them again, the customer charges back in the meantime, you don't want to charge them again, they call customer service, they interact with your customer service team in some way and no longer need the assistance of FlexPay. So this is an important thing to look at, and it is something that we do monitor actively within the platform, and we work very closely with the merchants that are working with us to help them understand why their data is showing the way it is, why we're seeing eligible numbers different from the decline numbers, why things are missing, and really help you guys dig into the business a little bit more and see if we can offer you any additional insights outside of the direct recovery that we're doing. As Darryl said, we were marketers for a long time, and so we have a lot of experience in transactions and in looking at what the business is doing, and we try to share that information with you guys in addition to doing the decline salvage for you. So that's really FlexPay as a platform. A lot of the magic, a lot of the fun happens on the back end. So on the front end, it's like you would see in a gateway, where you have a very simple interface that you can look at, and then a lot of the value comes out of what we're able to do on the back end and the service and the extra information we're able to provide to you. Does anyone have any questions to date? I just see a couple things popping up here. No. Okay. Anyone have any questions? I'll move into setting up.
I think we're good with questions so far.
Okay. So from a setup perspective, it's pretty straightforward. You have a list of payment gateways, and these are the same payment gateways that you're going to have in your LimeLight instance. In FlexPay, what we're going to do is we're going to create for you your different companies. A lot of merchants work under various DBAs. We'll work with you, establish all of your DBAs within FlexPay, and then you're going to be able to associate your merchant accounts to those specific DBAs. From that relationship and that setup, you'll see here, if we go into the drop-down list, this is a long drop-down list, sorry. I can just go here. So you have all of the different DBAs. If you select a specific DBA, you'll see just the merchant accounts associated to that. You have some that are enabled, some that are in refund only if they will have closed or will have changed in the past. And each of these will be associated to LimeLight via an API setup within LimeLight. So you will create a FlexPay gateway in the LimeLight CRM that will match to one or multiple gateways that are set up in the FlexPay system. This interaction will allow the transactions to flow from LimeLight into FlexPay, from FlexPay to your merchant account. It will process and settle in your merchant account using your credentials, so everything will be entirely transparent. And then it will come back to FlexPay. In the event that it's approved, the information goes straight back into LimeLight and your customer record is updated immediately. In the event that it declines, FlexPay will actually put that through our machine learning, our algorithm, to determine, as Darryl was talking about earlier, the next best date and time to attempt that transaction, the next best route to attempt that transaction on. And all of that information gets fed back into LimeLight as well, from which point LimeLight will call FlexPay back at the appropriate time to make sure that we're processing your transactions for you. So when I mentioned earlier, everything remains the ownership of LimeLight and remains active in LimeLight at all times. Once this is set up, then we just have to hop over to the LimeLight CRM and you will create a gateway. So you guys are I'm sure you're all very familiar with the LimeLight gateway interface. In here, you will set up a different FlexPay gateway per grouping that we looked at over here. And as I mentioned earlier, we can do this on a one-to-one relationship. If you have multiple merchant accounts within a DBA and we're able to use the testing route to actually find the best possible route to get to your merchant account, we can set it up in that way as well. My team is available to help you guys do the setup, to walk you through the setup. We have a number of questions that we go through with each new merchant who signs up to ensure that we're setting it up in the safest way possible for the merchant, while also being the most efficient possible for the recovery engine. And so you'll come in here, you'll set up your gateway as usual, and as you'll see, the setup is very straightforward. You have to post an API key into the credentials. From the API key, everything else will mirror your previously set up gateway. Once that's done, once you've created all of your different gateway providers, we can go right into the LimeLight load balancer, the decline manager, I'm sorry. And in the decline manager, you can create a profile specifically for FlexPay. And you will see that you have a FlexPay decline salvage, which will route to the FlexPay merchant account. So let me start this from the beginning and show you. You will call it FlexPay. We always set this to 7. This will give us the ability to, the 7 attempts before hold, this gives us the ability to ensure that we are able to get the most recovery for you within that 3 attempts on average that Darryl was talking about earlier. Again, we can talk about this.
Just to jump in on that real quick, Nick. So basically what happens is that the average attempts across all transactions usually stays under 3. But if we have good reason to believe, or if the machine learning system has good reason to believe that there's a particular customer that is more likely to be salvaged, it might go up to 7 attempts on that customer, whereas other customers that we believe are not as likely to be salvaged, we might never retry at all. At the end of the day, what we're looking to do is to get the maximum amount of dollars and cents salvaged with an average retry of under 3. But some transactions will definitely be more than 3. It's the average that we're trying to manage in order to keep the relationship with the bank healthy.
Exactly. Thank you, Darryl. So from there, after you set your attempts, you will be able to choose the gateway that we set up previously. Daily schedule, because FlexPay will be telling LimeLight when to go and set up the next attempt. And then you come next. Generally, we will keep the discount rate and the step down pricing as default. However, FlexPay, the way the LimeLight is integrated with FlexPay, we do respect the discount, the step down pricing that is available within LimeLight. And we will work with you to set up those criteria and set up specific step downs if you feel they're necessary. But as Darryl was mentioning earlier, that's something we generally want to do towards the late stages of the decline salvage. You don't want to do that on the upfront, because we're very capable of getting you back to your customers at your full value. And ideally, the customer at full value is worth more to you than obviously the customer at lower value. That's a pretty obvious statement. I understand that now. And then you have rules. So the rules here allow us to move transactions into the FlexPay decline salvage through one of 5 different ways. You can move at a campaign level. You can move it at a product level based on a decline reason, a card type, or most frequently at the gateway level. So you may have specific gateways already set up. You will have your standard gateways set up, and you're going to want to move certain of those gateways into the groupings that we've created within the FlexPay platform. This is a very similar setup to what you would do when you have a mid-grouping set up in LimeLight for load balancing your initial transactions. You can have a very similar setup for the decline salvage and grouping your transactions together. Once this is done, you can multi-select these, you save, and then your decline salvage is set up. This is really as simple as it needs to be, depending on how many merchant accounts you have open. This can go as quickly as, I've had a customer set this up in a grand total of 10 minutes. We've had a customer that it takes, if you have 150 merchant accounts, it may take a little bit longer, but my team is available to help you out. We're very familiar with LimeLight as well. We're very familiar with FlexPay, obviously. And we have done this setup with merchants in the past, for merchants in the past. We've walked them through it. We're here to make sure everything goes as smoothly as possible for you. Overall, that's the 2 systems and how they interact. Is there any questions about the setups? Any questions about how the systems work?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't look like we have any questions. I think you really thoroughly walked us through how the 2 systems interact, and I think thank you for pointing out that you can still use LimeLight Decline Manager in certain ways with FlexPay. Maybe just a good question is, how exactly does the FlexPay decline salvage service differ from how someone would be normally using the LimeLight Decline Salvager?
That's amazing you asked that, Valentina. Someone asked that exact same question just now in the chat.
Yeah, what are the main differences exactly?
Yeah.
There you go. So I guess I can jump in on that one if you want, Nick.
Go ahead, Darryl.
The most systems that are out there, whether it be, there's a lot of different systems that do decline salvage. You've got like Zuora, Rebilly, Recurly. There's obviously a decline salvage tool that's built right into LimeLight as well. all of these systems generally just take transactions and retry them according to some sort of schedule. There might be a little bit of sophistication as to when and how they're retrying the transactions, but you're basically just taking soft declines and resubmitting them in the hopes that you'll be able to get a certain number back on the books. What makes FlexPay different is that rather than just being a static rules-based system, having a stats-based model that's powered by machine learning means that every single attempt that we make is actually informed by an intelligent system behind the scenes. There's some people that have said, well, I don't really believe that. I think you're just retrying more times than other people. Well, I mean, the truth is you see the stats in the system. One of the reports that Nick had up on the screen shows exactly the number of retries that we are, how many retries we're attempting for each transaction that we get, for each customer that we get. It's all auditable and comparable to the merchant account. At the end of the day, if we generate a higher number of recoveries with the same amount of attempts or less, I guess it doesn't really matter how we do it, because at the end of the day, it's just dollars and cents in everyone's pocket. But the truth is, the only way that we can do that is if we had an intelligent system that tells us what we should do before we actually go ahead and do it. And that's what we have. So rather than just a system with some simple rules that are in it, I mean, the first version of FlexPay, I'll tell you in full transparency, back in 2012, when I first started building this for myself, the first version of it was all rules-based. If this, then that. If this, then that. If this and this, then that, right? And the problem that we ran into is that turns into spaghetti real quick. It's not sustainable at scale. There's just so many different variables that start to come in as to what you should do and when you should do it. So when we switched from a rules-based model to a stats-based model with machine learning, we saw an immediate bump of 50% across the board on our own traffic, which is when I kind of went, okay, I think we got something really good here. Let's actually bring this out and start solving this problem for other people. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, Rogelio, great question. If you want more detail, or if we didn't answer your question, please. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to keep the Q&A line open, as I mentioned. And at the beginning of this webinar, we actually launched a poll because we were interested to see, what is your current recovery rate on declined transactions. I'm actually going to go ahead and get your last votes in. A few more people are voting now. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in a few seconds here, and we'll see what those results are. So end it and share so everybody can see. Also, it looks like actually the majority was I'm not sure, or about 15 to 20%.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this is that in working with LimeLight, we pulled out the stats out of their decline tool across the entire portfolio of customers, and the average recovery across all customers on LimeLight using its internal tool is 16.3%. So for those of you who are saying 15 to 20, that's probably average. There are some customers who are up around 25.7, 26, 27%. The average recovery on FlexPay, however, for all customers on LimeLight who are using it right now is closer to 36 or 37%. So we're already over double what the standard LimeLight system is doing. And for some customers, we're actually over 50% recovery right now on their declines. The fun thing about a machine learning system is that every month, as it gets used to the specific nuances of a given advertiser and their business, the system gets better with time. So we see out of the gate, it might double the performance in the first 30 days, but then after 60 days, it's a little bit better. After 90 days, it's better still. It just keeps getting better over time as it learns more about the specifics of your business.
Cool,
and no one's asked how we charge for this, but I guess I might as well throw them, because obviously this isn't something that we do for free. We are a for-profit company, not a not-for-profit company. Everything we do is based on lift. So we charge a percentage of what we do that's better than what you were doing before. The flat fee that we charge for the service is about 10 to 12%, depending on the merchant and their profile of whatever we recover. So 10 to 12% of what we recover is what we charge. However, in the contract, there's always a true up clause that says after 30 days, after 60 days, after 90 days, we're going to sit together, we're going to review it. And we want to make sure that the fees that we've charged you are really a small subset of what we're doing that's better than what you were doing before. So if you're already doing 16% in LimeLight, you're going to get that 16% essentially for free. And we're only going to charge, you know, say 20-25% of what it is that we do that's better than where you were before. That's our commitment. We always want to make sure that we're only charging, because there's a lot of service providers out there who say, oh, they've got the sun, the moon, and the stars, and this is going to be amazing. It's going to change your business. At the end of the day, we want to put our money where our mouth is. We're only going to charge based on performance. If we don't do any better, which hasn't ever happened, if we don't do any better, you're going to get the service for free. We're going to credit you back all the invoices. But we're confident that we can put our money where our mouth is, and that the system is going to do significantly better. And the fees that we charge are always going to be a subset of the value that we've generated.
Darryl, that was a great intuition, because as you were answering the question, someone asked about the pricing. So
cool. And I did have that little give that I wanted to make that I talked about at the very beginning. So for those who stuck around and who think that this is even going to be a good fit, we talked a little bit about who it's a good fit for, especially people that are doing recurring billing. Obviously, if it's a real-time transaction, where there are some things that we can do to salvage it, but really for the people that are doing monthly recurring billing, that's where FlexPay really shines. It's on those rebills that we can do a fantastic job. So any merchant who is in that space is going to see particular value out of FlexPay, because again, we're not just recovering transactions, it's the future customer relationship that we're able to maintain. The give that I have from a partner is, as everybody knows, it's not easy to get merchant accounts if you're in the risk-free trial continuity space. However, we have a very close banking partner that has a limited amount of capacity that they were willing to offer up to FlexPay customers only. We looked at the amount of capacity that they're willing to give us. It's probably enough for about 20 merchants, no more. So I figured for the first 20 people that decide that they want to try FlexPay out and see if they want it on a first come first served basis, we're going to make introductions into that domestic US bank that we have, who is now giving, and it's not a bank that is in the trial space. It's not a bank that anybody really knows about or uses very frequently, which I think is a good thing, because you want to kind of stay off the radar of some of those other banks as much as possible. It also helps from an approval ratio. This is one of our favorite banks to work with because they get scored very well by the issuers, and it's a great tool in the toolbox for FlexPay to have as far as getting more transactions approved. But any merchant capacity is merchant capacity at the end of the day. So we have the ability to get no guarantees. They still have to underwrite it, and we don't make money off of this. We're not in the middle. It's just a straight introduction that we can make for the first 20 people that want to come and sign up.
Yeah, it looks like and our chat is blowing up a bit. A few people definitely already want in. So I think that probably the next question on everyone's mind is similar to someone that chatted us, is what are the next steps to getting started? This is obviously an amazing offer that Darryl just presented. So in order to get started with FlexPay and sign up, I'm actually about to share a link for a web form that we're going to need you to fill out so we can get your contact info and all the details of your domain. So let me go ahead and share that now. And go. There's the link to the web form. Let me just click it and make sure that it's working. It is
cool.
Great. And yeah, that will give us all the contact info and, like I said, those additional that additional information that we need to get you started. And looks like we have another question. Darryl, do you want to take this question? How long does it normally take for the AI to learn about customer stats and to start seeing a difference? So
what we find is what causes a transaction to approve or decline, 70% of that stays the same across all customers. So, but there is about a 20 to 30% that seems to be unique to an advertiser's specific demographic, price point. Since a lot of advertisers are buying from the same affiliates, we see that there's a lot of bleed over as far as what works well for merchant A is going to work well for merchant B, or for advertiser A works well for advertiser B. But there's, for some reason, always these little nuances and subtleties that are specific to that customer. We're doing the best we can to speed up that learning process. Like I said, out of the gate, we can usually give significant lift just in the first 30 days alone. We have several customers on LimeLight that have seen their performance double in the first 30 days. But it takes about 90 days, in fairness. After 90 days, it seems the performance kind of levels off. We continue to make tweaks and changes in the back end. So when we roll out a new version of a machine learning model, everybody's performance goes up a little bit. But as far as specific to a given merchant, the first 90 days is kind of like a soft ramp up. And after 90 days, it seems to plateau pretty stably. Again, like I said, we're working with the data scientists. We got a bunch of PhDs, guys who are like big into like data science on payroll, who are working on all these models and trying to make them better. So we're trying to speed that up. But right now, it takes about 90 days for it to really get up to speed.
Well, and Darryl, if I can just jump in real quick here as well. So that you're right, we'll be at peak performance after 90 days. You will see, merchants will see the improvements and the decline salvage kick in within the first week, week and a half. You're going to have some early indicators of what the performance is going to look like.
Yeah.
And my team is going to work very closely with each merchant to make sure that they understand the value, the recovery that we're doing. They'll understand the performance that we're able to provide to them, and really help walk them through what's going on, what's happening in each case. Also, Rogelio, you had a second part of your question, is once the profile is set up, you just let it ride. You don't have to do anything further on your end. No maintenance of rules or anything. That's correct. Once we're set up, unless something changes within your marketing campaigns, you're adding a new campaign, or you're changing merchant accounts, you're adding new merchant accounts, you're taking merchant accounts out, there's nothing you're going to have to do to maintain this. This is all managed within the FlexPay platform and through the integration with LimeLight. So our team manages everything that needs to get done from a model perspective, from a changes that Darryl was talking about perspective. The only thing we want to work with you guys on is understanding any changes to your business. If something changes from your at your mid-level, we want to talk to you about that. We want to understand to make sure we're respecting your merchant account changes or adding new merchant accounts into the mix if you get new accounts. Similarly, if anything changes from your marketing side, likelihood is you'll have someone from my team reaching out and saying, hey, we noticed there's your data is acting a little differently. Did anything change? We have that dialogue with you. We like to provide you that feedback that we see something changing. So if something has happened, you'll know about it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So it is really just kind of, it's built to be a set it and forget it as possible. Yeah. Once it's configured, assuming an advertiser hasn't had any changes in their business as far as getting new mids or losing mids or other things like that, it's set it and forget it. The system just does better and better over time, and it's kind of on autopilot from there.
Great. So we have a few more minutes here. Oh, and another question. Okay, Rogelio, we're glad we can answer all your questions. Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, get those in, and we'll keep answering them. And just to reiterate, I know a few of you already want to sign up, which is awesome. I would too. I shared the web form that you'll need to fill out. So please make sure you save that link. And even if you don't, no worries. Tomorrow I will be sending out the recording of this webinar if you missed anything or just want to listen again. And I will include the link to the web form in tomorrow's email as well. So even if you miss it here, get it tomorrow, and you can sign up for FlexPay. And as Darryl said, the first 20 people that sign up get on that amazing offer. So make sure you're one of those first 20 people.
Cool.
So, yeah, it looks like we've answered everyone's questions, and I think that's a wrap for today.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Valentina. We're pretty excited about this. I wish, the reason why I started this is I wish like 10 years ago when I was like running a business at scale and getting my butt handed to me by credit card declines, I was like, man, I wish that somebody would have been able to tell me what it is that I know now. So like they say among the world of entrepreneurs, be the change that you want to see in the world. So I'm happy to be able to get this out there. I'm excited about it. I think it brings a lot of value to advertisers and can help them to make their business more profitable. And I'm excited to see what we can do for those of you who are watching this who want to try it out.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Darryl and Nick for the demo.
Thanks guys.
Cheers.
Have a good day.